Alright, welcome back. In this lecture, which will be multi-part, I want to kind of begin to continue the discussion of the establishing of kind of a more American identity. We kind of began to scope that out a bit, but as colonial society began to establish itself from kind of the toeholds that we looked at last time in the last lecture, you'll see moving forward here, there'll be kind of a more of a definition that's taking place with the kind of succeeding waves of Puritans that'll be setting themselves up and beginning to spread into the hinterlands of New England, but also we'll see more defined characteristics of American, kind of an American-like identity that will begin to emerge in the Virginia colonies primarily as well. So we'll kind of begin to, like I said, take a look at that. We'll also want to talk about the daily life a bit of American identity. This will get us to about the turning point, about the dawn of the 18th century, where we'll begin to look into the Great Awakening and also the series of imperial wars culminating in the French and American War that'll really kind of set us up for understanding the motives and grounds for the American Revolution itself, and take us to the latter part of the 18th century. I'm hoping that if that doesn't happen in this week's component of lectures, that we'll definitely get that in for the early part of the succeeding week. Again, we're a little bit behind the time frame that I want to be, but these I think are going to be helpful. These lectures and kind of devoting the attention here that we need to will help us set us up for the remainder of the course. So where we left off talking about the mid-Atlantic region, basically from New England down to the Carolinas and Georgia, the kind of different types of settlement that were beginning to take place. You have primarily small farm owners, private homesteads being established in the New England region, whereas the farther south you go, especially into the Carolinas, and you have there we go, a more aristocratic kind of social structure beginning to emerge. We talked about the Dutch setting up colonies in places like New Jersey, Delaware, in what is today New York City primarily. And so you have a variety of experiences that colonists can interact with and engage with. They have opportunities to enjoy a greater amount of social mobility as far as social rank is concerned, and that they can really see to the betterment of their own condition through land ownership and their own personal prosperity. That is to say, however, that life was not easy, regardless of location, whether it be in the Virginia region or in the Massachusetts Bay colonies. Life was, for the colonists, was rather depressing and hard. Significant numbers of settlers died within the first year or few years of emigrating to the New World. This is largely due to conditions or factors such as malnutrition, starvation, disease, bitter cold, oppressive heat, Indian attacks. Also, you had factors like murder and suicide contributing to the hardships or kind of factors that would result as coming about as a result of the hardships. Individuals would have to literally carve out their living from the wilderness in which they found themselves. They would work all day on construction and crop cultivation. This would dominate daily life 6 days a week. Sunday, of course, was a religious day for religious observance. It was a rather lonely existence for these early arrivals. Um, there was little to do besides work, eat, and sleep. Settlers were overwhelmingly male early on. Um, Only later did women begin arriving in greater numbers. The first year was the roughest, adjusting to the new climate, the new environment, and surroundings. This was often termed as seasoning, in which settlers faced life in this new subtropical or semi-tropical kind of humid conditions, um, with sunburning summers, um, leading, dehydration, heat stroke would be rather common. And these were conditions that we're fully familiar with, living and having grown up in these conditions. But for Europeans, for primarily the English coming over, um, this was a completely different environment in which they had to acclimate themselves. So, summers in, I'll say, pre-industrial summers in Europe were not necessarily as humid, or the fluctuations in temperature were more moderate. You know, in our 21st century world, it's quite different, but for 17th century, Europe didn't usually experience such wild swings in temperate conditions. Of course, here it can get the pendulum effect from hot, humid summers is bone chilling winters. So this was something that the colonists had to adjust to, and in many cases they were poorly prepared to do so. There was also several perceived threat to civility, that the wilderness could be a disorienting type of environment. Many settlers worried about losing touch with a civilization, feeling that the American wilderness could turn them into savages, just the mere conditions themselves. And so, in many cases, English settlers were inclined to cling to a conservative kind of approach to social hierarchy, a sense of order, to distinguish themselves within their society, and kind of erect kind of a standard of conduct, of how to comport themselves. How did they do this? Well, essentially they focused on being educated in kind of traditional fields, European fields of study. They focused on the Christianity, which they overwhelmingly were, on established notions of civility, and they also focused on their definition as free, and particularly free men. These were the markers that many embraced in order to distinguish European from non-European. Um, so it was effective not only in uh, being against, or kind of offering this mechanism for separation within their own society, but also obviously is going to have obvious knock-on effects with regard to relations with non-Europeans, again primarily Native Americans and also Africans, and others. there are two particular examples within English, primarily settlements, where primarily within Puritan society, more specifically, where we see this really kind of playing itself out and having some pretty substantial consequences. And this is what's known as the separatist versus non-separatist schools of thought, or social organization. This idea of enlightenment versus order argument may be another way to think about it. So, as we talked about last time, Puritans wanted to spread the word of God and live their lives as devout subjects according to God's teachings in the Bible in order to achieve salvation, and primarily, obviously, achieve salvation for themselves. They had a hard time doing this in England. It's the reason for their coming over to the New World, where they felt that they could be free of any type of oversight, or any type of judgment or persecution. So primarily, Puritans focused on enlightening and educating people in order to create standards for how to go about that process of salvation. As early as 1636, they're going to establish Harvard College. Today is known as Harvard University in Massachusetts. This would allow for and create a professionally trained priesthood. But what's interesting here is that you might have an institution such as Harvard being created in order to enlighten people and educate them. Yet there is this underlying undercurrent of wanting to have them conform at the same time to a similar or a particular religious doctrine. And there were, again, several ways of going about this, which shows how Protestantism, in this case Puritanism, begins to suffer from fractures within its own community. And this is manifests itself in the separatist versus non-separatist schools of thought. Separatists wanted to completely break away from the Church of England. They wanted to, break ties with the old world as much as possible. They believed, again, that the Anglican Church was fouled with immorality and corruption, and it was, incapable of being reformed or, salvaged, essentially. This harkens back to kind of the mode or line of thinking that Martin Luther might have had with regard to the Catholic Church in Rome. So you can see the similar parallels beginning to take effect here. But now we're talking about Puritans arguing that other Puritan institutions are beyond hope and rescue. So these separatists believe that continuing any type of relationship with the Anglican Church would jeopardize the fresh new beginnings in that the New World presented, the new opportunities to essentially kind of get things right, get to establish a fresh start, to recreate a Garden of Eden, if you will, in the New World. That there's this, as they saw it, a blank slate, virgin canvas on which to create a utopian society. And that's what these Puritan separatists looked to and kind of saw as their religious mission in order to get things right, to create a more perfect society. Non-separatists, however, hoped again to purify, maintain the standards of purifying the Anglican Church, to use the New World as an example to those in the Old World, in order to try and change the Old World, show the Old World how how it should reform itself, and use the New World as that example. So many historians kind of point to this dichotomy, this debate really between separatists and non-separatists, as a very early characteristic, and kind of the foundation of American identity. And it also gives us a sense of historical perspective. I mean, I don't think it's too much of a. I think there is some parallel, if not quite a strong tendency to draw a line of thought from what we're talking about here with separatists versus non-separatists, and more contemporary debates over how involved the something like the United States should be with the world around it. So this is a debate. It's a just a natural kind of a natural conversation that has been going on for centuries. This also gets us back to where we left off last time, talking about John Winthrop and others like John Cotton, these early church figures, looking at the Puritan experiment in New England, in Massachusetts Bay, as this kind of city upon a hill type of idea, that the Puritan community in the New World is an example, and needed to reflect as much. Separatists included the likes of William Rogers. He believed that who was a member of the church who would basically break off and go his own way. He believed that non-separatist Puritans were themselves corrupt. People like John Winthrop and John Cotton and other of his more contemporary figures. He became Roger Williams himself became very good friends with local Native American tribes, and later on he would go and proclaim that all land claims made by colonists were invalid, essentially baseless, because they had been negotiated, or had not been negotiated with Native American tribes directly. He argued that the claims that were issued by the King of England for land in the New World had no jurisdiction, and that colonists who based their land charters and property rights on the European model were simply null and void, that they needed to be negotiated with the Native American population in order to be seen as valid. In 1635, Roger Williams' ideas were so inflammatory that the Puritans managed to banish him from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. That is basically to evict him. He would flee to found a new colony, and establish this new colony in and around what is today Providence, Rhode Island. As a result, he's going to help found that colony, the colony of Rhode Island, and in which he would welcome all faiths, all religious faiths, including Judaism. So Roger Williams here is for the time, he's an extremely forward-thinking type of figure, but he wasn't alone. Anne Hutchinson was another figure that would, play into and begin to challenge the established hierarchy of the Puritan not only not only the religious order but also the social order, because the two are so intertwined within the Puritan colonies, within the kind of the religious and social order. And Hutchinson began to spread alternative forms of religious doctrine, as Roger Williams had. She based this on a type of spiritual enlightenment, where God would, in her interpretation, uh, she, God would fulfill or would fill followers with a mystical Holy Spirit that resulted in salvation. So this is, just a more it's more focused on religious and mystical kind of elements here, rather than maybe Roger Williams, who is more, you might say, socially or politically based. And Hutchinson argued that many of the church leaders themselves weren't imbued with this Holy Spirit, which detracted from their legitimacy as far as social and religious leaders were concerned. Orthodox Puritans, as you might expect, interpreted Hutchinson's views as an attack upon the entire social order. They labeled her an antinomian, which was essentially a person in the 17th century context in which she lived. An antinomian, as she was labeled, was a person who contested the standing social order. And the fact that she is a woman here would even go serve as a case in point, in that very fact, that this female figure is contesting the basis of Puritan society and its organization. She would be responsible really for personalizing an individual's relationship to God. Therefore, she's essentially marginalizing the churches, and we're talking about the Puritan churches, and the congregation's role in society. That essentially, it's yet again another redefinition of a different way to reach a sense of salvation based on a more individual type of model. So, where Puritans were focused more on community, on social order, on society itself, as the main engine for salvation, and people, kind of conforming to a particular social interpretation. Um, these Puritan teachings are going to be what you might say are the foundations for civil society and salvation, so that these two concepts, um, you know, religious salvation on the one hand and civil society on the other, are intertwined, and this too is something that Hutchinson is beginning to question. Much like Roger Williams in 1638, Anne Hutchinson would be banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And just like Roger Williams, Anne Hutchinson would flee to Rhode Island, where she would establish her own community, her own kind of religious community. In 1639, she would have some of her followers, some of her disciples, went on to found the New Hampshire colony. So, and this is again a significant characteristic of these English settlements and English settlers themselves. That if you didn't like where you were, if you didn't like what you were experiencing in a certain settlement and in certain community, then you could either one, move elsewhere voluntarily, or two, be evicted and be forced to relocate. And in both Roger Williams and Ann Hutchinson's experience, and even in the in the example of establishing a New Hampshire colony, you see that played out to a T here. And so this is going to be something that you're going to see time and time and time and time again over the course of the westward settlement of what would be the English colonies, but then also obviously an extension once the United States wins its independence and becomes a formal recognized country. So again, if people are looking to make it on their own, have this keen individualist type of streak to them, if they're a religious community that needs to carve out their own way in nature, or in preserving maybe the key characteristics of their identity, then the migration ever westward is going to be kind of a very attractive option. So these are two examples, the experience of Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, that occur early on in the 17th century. We also have another more popularized example occurring at the end of the 17th century, and that is the Salem witch trials. In let me Before I launch into that, let me take a break here for the end of part one, and I'll pick up with Salem witch trials in